let's start with the spring equinox. And remember, everyone, equinoxes and solstices, the beginning of the seasons, when we look at these charts, the cardinal ingress, they give us an overview of the world, our hive, our experience for the following 3 months. So this period, April, May, June, remember, we have transiting Pluto coming close to its return location before it retrogrades. So even though there's tremendous ambiguity and deception with the Neptunian energy that's been there for the past year, Pluto is now bringing up and exhuming the dark, the coercion of the masses, the abuses of power, and there's a real consolidation of energies happening here, both dark and light. You can see this in the Pluto Volcanis Admetos structure on this equinox, which can tell us of transformation that is happening due to resistance, and it's also persistence of the forces, again, both dark and light. So the deep state cabal, the only thing they have left now is the media and the psychological coercion and manipulation, which is a very powerful tool. So they're trying to scare people and put them in fear because it lowers the vibration, and they need to convince you that you need them. And this again is the forced dependency that they're trying to create, which the people are slowly turning against. And this is really going to become a very intensive situation as Pluto reaches its return point as we get into 2022, February, March, going to be a very interesting time. So the Saturn-Uranus square right now is so important here on the equinox, especially as we move forward, because these same structures, Saturn-Uranus, are in both eclipses, May and June, as well as the summer solstice. Saturn-Uranus is telling us about this transitioning between the old and the new. So there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of tension, there's an urge to break away from the old system, the old programming and restrictions, but also a fear of doing so. So the Uranus can break through old structures connected to the past, and the Saturn can help create new ones. The Saturn can also attempt to limit or block the progression. So with the Saturn-Uranus, people are waking up. And we're also dealing with the deep state cabal's attempt to shut it all down and return to the old matrix system. But it is the liberation that is on the mind of the collective with the strong Jupiter-Uranus conjunction here. And it will be through this time, the equinoxes, the eclipses, the summer solstice, that people will start to understand the true meaning of freedom and sovereignty. And so with the Saturn-Uranus-Jupiter structure here, there can be tremendous growth, a sudden great situation, or a sudden breaking from a structure, which might at first seem like a loss and then turns out to be great because we're transitioning into the new. It had to happen that way. So the Jupiter-Uranus in this configuration here is strong. Because it's a conjunction to the world axis. This is the desire for freedom and independence and optimism. Reinhold Eberton calls this Jupiter-Uranus midpoint structure the thank the Lord position, because so often it indicates suddenly being released from tensions, or like, oh my God, thank God that finally happened. And I know, or something has finally broken. I know that there's a lot of energy out there right now wanting this. And so, we saw the day of the equinox, this very powerful Jupiter-Uranus-Saturn configuration. We saw anti-lockdown protests around the world, people really kicking against the restrictions of freedom. On the same day, Trump announced that he'd be starting a new social media platform, which is another kind of positive expansion toward the light. And so this is a very important move also, this platform, because it connects Trump to the world and to the people in a place of free speech, and no censoring, where there are like minds that can connect. And so you're getting this whole Jupiter, Uranus, this positive manifestation with the Saturn building something, very expansive. And it's funny because Trump had these powerful and positive Jupiter directions, progressions, and transits in his chart right now. And, we looked at this in January and I thought, well, this is probably going to be, if he's going to come out and shake things up and become president of the Constitutional Republic, it could be around them because there are so many Jupiter progressions. But as I was looking at this, as I started looking more deeply at the time period, I was like, no way, this is not synchronistic with what is happening in the world. And his chart is taking on this other trajectory, particularly around strategy and military strategy and alliances and things like that, which we'll get into. And I've been saying to myself the last few weeks, it's going to be something really positive, and it's got to be something also in the position that he's in that connects him to the people. And I thought like a new social platform. And I know that, he's talked about it for a while, but I thought that would really be a great time for that. Because even the timing of when he says the platform will be out 2 to 3 months from now is exactly when things begin to shift in his chart and he really starts to gain this strong impact and connection with the public. Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter can be signaling the financial system. And this is a big one, because the monetary system is just another belief system, and our consciousness is changing, and our reality construct will begin reflecting that. Because what you're seeing is this race toward the 2 global currency resets between the central banking system and we the people. But the central banking system is failing. The people are dismantling their system. And I believe this is going to really get amped up as Jupiter makes its way over March, April, and May. So it's Jupiter moving to Apollon, then Jupiter to Apollon Vulcanus, Jupiter to Vulcanus, before Jupiter finally parks itself with Pluto and Mitos on the summer solstice. All of those midpoint structures, the Jupiter with the Vulcanus, Apollon, the Pluto and Mitos, those are all really excellent, expansive financial structures. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as we move forward, because there's already things happening. There are things happening with the cryptocurrency. There are things happening, I understand, with the quantum financial system, which I am not well schooled in. I hope to be, but I just don't have the time right now. And so when you actually go into these points, the Saturn, the Uranus, which I won't do visually here for time's sake, what you find around the Uranus is this heart and soul desire for freedom and to evolve and grow. And with the Saturn, you're getting a lot of fear, uncertainty, worries due to the sensitivity of the Neptunian energy being there. And I think this is really speaking to the tension of this change, which brings us to the Chiron Neptune Hades, because the Chiron here that is now on the scene for the first time is going to help the collective break through the attachments, the illusions, the codependence, the government illusions, which are clouding the vision. Now, we already know with the Neptune Hades, which has been on the world axis pretty much the entirety of this past year. And so the deception, the ambiguities, the nefariousness, so much is unclear. It's so hard to see the truth, to know the truth. It's the virus hoax, it's the fake election, the fake administration, the nonstop injection propaganda. It's everything nefarious that they're trying to put in place. What is most difficult with the Neptune Hades is that everything is unseen. It's truly an invisible war. And Neptune Hades wages war through the conditioning of the collective subconscious. Their lies, their propaganda for eons. This is how they've controlled humanity. And this stuff will all continue. But Chiron's entrance on the scene is going to begin to change all that, because Chiron will create situations that'll force people to come to grips with reality. Chiron is all about integration. It's integration not only of our deepest fears and anxieties, but our attachments to our false or unrealistic ideals. The idealizations and the illusions around government, authority, the old matrix that have kept us safe, but have enslaved us to the system and separated us from our godness and our light. And so Chiron Neptune can initially teach us a lesson or two about reality and our willingness to deceive ourselves because we're perhaps frightened as to what it all means if our fears are true. So this Chiron Neptune Hades, very primitive, very primal. Often when you see the Neptune Hades in an individual chart, if it's strong and around the meridian, which is the soul, it could potentially be very creative and very humanitarian, but it's often connected to a lot of fears and anxieties and deprivation, around letting go, trusting one's intuition, because the Hades, again, very primitive, very primal. And so often when it's connected with self-expression or connecting with the non-concrete world, using your intuition or trusting your intuition, it's like, don't go there, don't bother, it's not going to work out, leave well enough alone. And in the same way, this is happening with much of the population that's asleep. Don't go there, leave well enough alone. And so it's going to put us face to face with our fears and our imagination so that they can be cleared, and where we can begin tuning in and listening to our intuitions, because that is what is really required from every single person. Now, I came across this incredible passage this morning in Melanie Reinhardt's Chiron and the Healing Journey. Just happened to pick it up because I was interested to see what she had to say about this Neptune Chiron, because it's here now, but it's coming back at the winter solstice, and it's going to be around next year. It's an important midpoint. And what I read literally made the hair stand up on my neck. And this was written years ago. And so I'm going to put it up and read it for you guys because it is so prescient and important. So Melanie Reinhardt speaks here of the situation during the Chiron-Neptune conjunction in Aquarius around 2009, 2010. And she wrote it around that time or just after. So here, in this equinox chart, even though the Neptune Chiron are not actually in conjunction, their midpoint, the Neptune Chiron midpoint, is conjuncting the world axis. So it's a similar energetic. So I'm just going to read here this excerpt from her book. Firstly, let us explore a recent and bizarre expression of Chiron aspecting Neptune, which occurred during 2009 as they were approaching exact conjunction, February 17, 2010, at 2614 of Aquarius. The swine flu phenomena revealed many layers of typically Neptunian deception. The specter of medical fascism stalked the global imagination through the internet, disguised as public health concerns. With breaking news about forced vaccination programs, the threat of huge fines for refusal, and permission for law enforcement agencies to exercise coercion. A journalist named Jane Burgermeister claimed to have filed an injunction in April 2009 against the World Health Organization and Baxter Pharmaceuticals, who manufacture the vaccine, on the grounds of bioterrorism and genocide. Later that year, her credibility plummeted in the wake of allegations concerning deception she herself had apparently perpetrated on a public eager to expose deception. Confusion abounded, public feeling was manipulated, resources were wasted. Neptune also rules chemicals and by extension, the pharmaceutical industry. Was a sinister deception wrought upon an unsuspecting public who were sleepwalking into allowing vaccines allegedly containing various potentially deadly adjuvants. Were we sold the notion of what is actually a fantasy, Neptune, disease pandemic, Chiron? Is there really a plan for genocide on Earth being executed through pseudo-medicine? Interestingly, the WHO, who was inaugurated in 1948 following a conference in the summer of 1946, when the last Chiron-Neptune conjunction occurred. The horoscope for the founding of the United Nations, of which the WHO is a specialized branch, features this conjunction in Libra, together with Venus and Jupiter in the sixth house of health. Indeed, these scales of justice have created laws which actually trump, that's an interesting word to use, national laws in the event of an emergency such as a pandemic. Rather than initiatory awakening, disease has become a political weapon created and exploited for economic gain, although in this case the intent is far more sinister. And at the end of this outgoing cycle, we're reminded that things are indeed not as they seem in the world of public health. And then she goes on to write, the whole phenomena certainly shone a spotlight on the issue of vaccination, waking people up to its consequences. There is enough information available for people to do their own research and reach their own conclusions rather than following the collective illusions, Neptune, about what supports health, Chiron. So spring equinox, just to recap, we're in this transition period. Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, we are absolutely forging ahead, but there is this tension between the old and the new, and it's a careful and controlled expansion with the Saturn, and there will be losses and gains, but the losses are to make way for the new structure. And the Pluto return, the Pluto Volcanis Admetos here, there's a consolidation of energies now, light and dark, that feeds this tension as we start to pull away from the old system. You know, a light is being shown into the darkness, and there are things happening. A deep, deep transitioning is happening underneath this all. And the Chiron Neptune Hades is most likely going to create some very intensive situations. You know, there's so much obscurity, there's so much deception with that Neptune Hades still, and it's strong on the world axis now. But I think with the Chiron, there's going to be, there's this continued disclosure of the truth around the injections where people will begin to leave their emotional attachments to the old system behind, clear away the confusion, and start to bring light to what is hidden. And in this new paradigm, it is one's intuition that is king. Most helpful and affecting all the energies here is that we have Poseidon on the world axis. So everything is flowing through this point as well. Poseidon is an aspect of enlightenment. Think of Poseidon being here now like the Hive is totally being plugged into universal guidance, even into galactic consciousness. We come out of the dark and into clarity, and you will see that, and I look forward to this, you'll see that Poseidon contacting the world axis several more times over the next few years. Okay, so next up are the eclipses, and if I'm going to help you understand this time and the energies we're all working with individually and as a collective, then we have to start working with the eclipse charts, and I really feel like I want to pull these in alongside the world charts because they are invaluable pieces of information to the story. So eclipses present the unfolding story. Eclipses are windows of time when certain energies are made available to us that guide us along our evolutionary path. They're what we're working on, and they're also what we're working with, that is necessary for our evolution. Eclipses are sequential. They have long cycles called series that run about 18 years. So there are usually 2 sets, sometimes 3 sets of eclipses each year. And so there is meaning and purpose and universal wisdom, as they unfold, as we move from one to the next. They often bring an event, but not necessarily in and around the time of the eclipse. It can be a bit before or after, and that is what sets the course often. But the most important aspect of an eclipse is that the energies are activated for months. It's not just about the day of the eclipse. It is, and sometimes it very much can be, but it is during those months after that you'll find yourself addressing the information provided by the eclipse. So that's why they're so amazing to take a look at. And if the eclipses fall on personal points or sensitive structures in your personal chart, they'll have profound meaning, as these upcoming eclipses do for Biden and Trump. So here on this upcoming lunar eclipse, May 26th, 5 degrees, 26 minutes of Sagittarius, we have Saturn, Uranus again, this time on the main axis, and it's joined by Poseidon. So this structure of Uranus, Saturn, Poseidon is not only an integral part of the lunar eclipse of May 26th, but it's also important in the planetary pictures of the solar eclipse on June 10th and the summer solstice on June 20th. With the Poseidon joining the fray, it can mean sudden understanding about things, that we're getting the truths or facts about the past or the future, that we're getting some clarification, and it can also be the beginning of a separation from the old ideologies and the narrative. The people are getting stronger. They're seeing what's going on. And note that the Saturn, Uranus, Poseidon is on the main axis with Mars, Zeus. So this is war, and there will most definitely be military strategy, military involvement, possible conflagrations. Definite false flags are already happening. Could be arson too. We could be dealing with more domestic terrorism, and you're already seeing this in these mass shootings, which is really their attempt to disarm and disempower the people. So it is a direct attack on the Second Amendment. And these are also ideological clashes. As people become more enlightened about the truth, there's this incredible tension. There's a lot of strong emotion that's not necessarily bad, and a warring hive. So the events around the time are going to further highlight this driving movement away from the density and repressive control of the 3D world and into the new paradigm. And we'll be more clear about exactly how these structures are manifesting as we get closer. But we also have Hades Volcanus here, and Hades Volcanus is dark force energy. Boy, this really adds fuel to the fire. We could really be seeing the deep state, cabals, coercion, and rage. I mean, in a way, it's kind of, I hate to say it this way, it's kind of comical and biblical how they're literally trying to round up and control every single human being on this planet. And at the same time, there are too many awake people saying no for their plan to ever work. But they're going to fight this to the end. And we can be seeing military actions from the good guys as well. But let's look a bit deeper into this Hades Volcanus structure and see what it might be confirming. So around the Volcanus, we have Saturn, Uranus, Mars, Mars, Zeus, Uranus, Aries, and Mythos. This is a very willful combination, powerful resistance, powerful opposition, both light and dark. This could further be indicating this warring populace or military action that's in full effect. But the Venus node is also there, so that can indicate that the military's efforts, again, are peacekeeping as well. And if we go over to the Hades, in this Hades Volcanus picture, we pick up on the Sun, Moon, Saturn, Poseidon, which is telling us that there's a lot of fear and anxiety around this shift. It could be a time where people are really feeling out of it, like they're in between those trapeze bars, the issue of ideological differences, the world view. There's such a chasm in it, you can't go back, but we're not yet in the new energy as a collective, so there's very much a feeling of being out of sync. But it can also be telling us that people are slowly learning about the facts, that they're getting clarification on things. And with the Neptune-Pluto Hades here, which has been on and off that Hades point a lot, this is a structure for, real medical issues, can be epidemic illness, a lot of nefarious situations that are subtle, hard to see. It can be confusing. It can be hard to see whether they're lying about the severity of the variants or that we have a real issue, real medical issues around those who have been injected with these mRNA shots and they're producing variants, more virulent variants to the virus. So a lot of imperceptible, subtle changes. It can be the development of things getting worse. All of these things need to come out. They're so evil. They know exactly, what they're doing. And so jumping ahead to the solar eclipse at June 10th, which is at 19 degrees 47 minutes of Gemini on June 10th, this is where it gets really interesting because it talks about shifting powers, major changing outlook, ideological changes. The Hive is becoming more aware of being deceived. And Chiron is back on the main axis, which is helping people in this transitioning time to integrate those subconscious fears by bringing them into the light. So we can open up and be more free, so we can transcend the restrictions and the limitations. Kronos is there too, which has a lot to do with transitions with officials, authority, executive power. And so this time, the Saturn, Uranus, Poseidon is there again. It returns to the picture, but now with Pluto and the node in this 3-point picture. And remember, it's also going through that Kronos and Chiron. So you have this Saturn-Pluto midpoint structure, Uranus-Pluto, Pluto-Poseidon, exactly here on this axis. This is major change. And this indicates major changes in the power of state, major ideological changes in the thinking and the outlook, new connections and separation from the old ones that are important for mental and spiritual development with the Poseidon. Remember that Poseidon is so key here because it's helping us move from confusion to clarity. It's universal guidance, and this energy is activated for months. And it is particularly poignant how Biden and Trump's chart hook in so very strongly to this solar eclipse, and we'll go through that in a minute. But I think that the period that these eclipse energies are effective, and consider them effective for several months until the next set of eclipses in November, December, the potential for changes in the current administration, the Biden-Harris administration, are strong, and those charts are pretty amazing to look at. So we'll do that in a bit. Now, the Neptune Vulcanus on the side is a very powerful influence coming from invisible forces where there can be extraordinary manipulation and deception, and likewise, there can be great diplomatic or future power being felt and seen. So, and it also can be telling us about the powerlessness of the government or failing leadership or failing authorities. And I think around the time of the eclipse, and in the weeks and months following is when we may see this whole Biden-Harris situation coming to fruition, which we're going to look at in a minute. And the Mercury here, and it's really like a Mercury Apollon, which is very expansive on the mental realm, but the Mercury here is also in its own sign, Gemini, conjunct the solar eclipse in Gemini, which is, again, this is another confirmation, another emphasis that there are changes in outlooks and that we'll be seeing a lot of communication on the national and international levels. There's one more thing I want to say about this eclipse before we take a look at these amazing pictures in Trump, Biden, and Harris's chart. And so I often consult with Elias Lonsdale's most excellent channeling of the astrological degrees, which are his interpretation of the Sabian and Chandra symbols, but they're from a place of higher dimension and galactic consciousness, and I highly recommend them to anyone to explore. You can look at a zodiacal degree interpretation for anything, but if you're interested, I would start with your birthday degree, and I'll put the link in the description as they're all online. But here, as this solar eclipse, we're looking at 19 Gemini 47, or the 20th degree of Gemini. And so here's what he has to say. Variations on old themes involving bondage and freedom. When you are trapped, caught, stuck, a furious inner force asserts itself and can reconfigure everything. But it is a high-stake ritual drama and loaded with real dangers. You must check yourself out in ultimate ways, for there is surging in your blood an impulse toward liberation, which cannot be distorted in any way. An extraordinary journey through radical tests and trials of initiatory intensity. It is all about guts and stripping away everything but the true inner direction. And if you must slay and move through illusions on every front, that is just how it is. You cannot survive any longer on old ways to do it. It is time to welcome the enemy into your very midst and discover that there are no enemies.